the rules of this chat make clear sense, and I don't need to pull up a PowerPoint presentation to kind of talk through it. Fantastic. Thank you. Brilliant. Sarah, don't worry about it. Honestly, I'm not that hard on rules. It's all good. It's all good. Thank you very much. So we've got some in the people with their hands up and some people with their thumbs up. I don't care. I just know that that means you're listening and things are working. Thank you, Louise. Brilliant. All good. Okay, so if you have your hand up at the moment and you don't want to be called upon, please put your hand down. If you are happy to be called upon, you can absolutely keep your hand up. I will do my best to kind of scroll up and down to make sure that I can cover people's questions and such like as well. So, Becky and Noel, are you ready to get started?
Raring to
Fantastic.
go.
Brilliant. So first of all, I'm going to just ask you guys, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to my training history, and then I'm going to ask you guys to both just do a little introduction into your training history as well, just so people can contextualize. I have been training now for, gosh, probably just over 20 years. But I started off delivering training within organisations that I was working within. And then I became a trainer for safeguarding within a NSPCC children's charity. And then I developed my own training company probably about 8.5 years ago now. We deliver a whole host of different training, but myself personally, we started off where my heart sits, which is in safeguarding and delivering safeguarding training. But I now primarily I've delivered, I would say, thousands of training sessions over my lifetime, but obviously most of those over the last 8 years. And I now do predominantly training in things like leadership and management, executive leadership. I still do a bit of kind of a high level safeguarding, and then some things around business development and such like. That's where I kind of sit when I'm delivering training now. I don't deliver training as much as I used to, but I still do get to deliver a little bit of training online and a little bit of training face to face as well. So Becky, over to you.
Thanks, Tammy. So my background's actually in education. So I have been a teacher for over 20 years. Some might say the hardest training that you have to deliver with the hardest audience. So I've been training teenagers. I specialise in work around children and young people, but also mental health and well-being, safeguarding, same as Tammy. So when I left teaching full time, I went to teach teachers how to support young people's mental health and well-being. So I deliver lots for Tay around their safeguarding. I delivered domestic abuse level 1 training this morning, and around professional boundaries, professional curiosity, that sort of space. And I also deliver things like youth mental health first aid and my own training in my own business. So yeah, that's me. Over to Noel.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Becky.
Becky.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've been delivering training for a few years now. Coming on 4 years with Tay Training when I did the trainer course. I've just kind of been stuck doing quite a bit of stuff for Tay, which I'm not complaining about because I love every single bit of it, and it just gives me an opportunity to explore within multiple different fields. So 2 days ago, for example, I was delivering perpetrators of domestic abuse kind of within the criminal justice system. But I find a lot of my work is within the criminal justice system, whether that's working with frontline staff or whether it's working with people within prison or people being released on license. I also have my own wellness training company as well, which I like to kind of incorporate lots of trauma-informed type stuff, but more specifically being trauma-informed to ourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Noel. Thank you very much, Becky. Both Noel and Becky, as I've said, have delivered for Tay for many, many years now. Both of them been through our Train the Trainer course, and both of them also award-winning facilitators. So it's really great just to have them here to give us this time and share their experience. So I'm going to kind of kick off, and I'm going to start with you, Becky, if that's okay, just to get this session going. I think I'm going to start. We've had a few questions sent in, and then I've got a few from the people in the audience. And actually, I'm going to start with one that has come up a few times, and that is about managing distractions, particularly now in an online world. I know that we talked last week and the week before about kind of cameras on and cameras off, and we talked about accelerated learning and having lots of different activities and things like that. But still, sometimes when you're delivering training, the people that you're delivering to, despite your best efforts, seem to be quite distracted. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so it is a really difficult one, and you know, I think we'll always come up with human beings, aren't we? We're naturally interested in things that are going on around us. I think one of the things I've particularly learned from working with Tay and from doing the train the trainer is, and I think I mentioned it last week, if not the week before, is I think making the connection with your participants is the first thing. So we always invite participants in one by one and have a quick chat with them. And whilst that doesn't stop distractions, it reduces it because they feel connected to you as a presenter in some way. They're not just coming on and going, oh, I've got to listen to this training. It's like, oh, that's Becky. She spoke to me earlier. We talked about dogs or cats or whatever was going on in that moment. And you've made a connection with someone, so they're less likely to be distracted. But if there are, you know, we always start our training sessions with clear expectations, and that comes actually from the participants. So we will create a learning agreement that the participants feed into, and it always comes up. Let's be focused, let's be engaged. And that's not from me, that's from other people. And you know, in my training session this morning, I did talk about the fact that, you know, it's really easy to be distracted by emails and your phone and things like that, but actually you're giving up really precious time to be here and do this training. So it can be about, I guess, setting the tone. But if someone continued to be distracted, I would definitely direct message, just check in on them. So do it in a positive way. Is everything okay? I've noticed that, rather than, you know, calling them out in the middle of the session and saying, no, why aren't you paying attention? It would be a direct message. Oh, Noel, I've noticed that, you know, you're on your phone. Is there something you need to deal with? By all means, step aside. And then you've given them the option to go, yeah, I've got this really big safeguarding issue I need to do. Fine, step aside. But you've also highlighted that you are aware, because I think sometimes also some people think you're a robot, don't know that you can actually see what they're doing, and they forget that you can actually see when they're just, you know, doing whatever. But it's also, you know, we talked about this a little bit. It's about not making a judgment as well, because someone might look distracted, but actually that's how they concentrate. So, you know, you've talked, Tammy, a lot about the fact that you will get up and move a lot during a session. That's not because you're not listening, that's how you listen. So it's also about not bringing judgment to a space, I think, and reaching out, checking in, all of those things, rather than just getting cross and assuming the worst of people.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely thing to finish that on, really, is about, you know, as facilitators, sometimes it's our belief in how somebody should behave that makes us feel like somebody is distracted. And certainly I know, you know, even for face-to-face training in particular, if I see somebody on their phone, I have to consciously say to myself, but Tammy, you do that. Do you know, step back, take a breath, do you know, that type of thing. And I'll ask them a question and things and see, do you know, actually, are they switched on? Are they engaging? Are they this? Do you know, I do a lot of my notes on my phone. I voice record things, I edit, and do you know, all of that type of stuff. But it looks like I'm potentially checking Facebook, and I think that no judgment thing is really key, as long as, like, that rapport part that you said, Becky, for me, for 99% of the difficulties in training, um, they're overcome by that building the rapport. Do you know, like, I know we talk about it all the time, and we have to justify it and push back with customers sometimes about why we want their attendees, why we want them to come early. We have to push back about why we will do introductions and why they're so important, and why we do that safe space and everything and the health check at the beginning. And we have to push back sometimes on the time that will take. But for what it brings to you, the benefits that building that rapport brings, I think you're right. It humanizes you, doesn't it, Becky?
And I think Esther's made a really good point in the chat as well, which sometimes people don't think about, is that, you know, maybe someone's distracted because you're boring. Maybe you haven't changed.
Yeah.
Seriously, maybe you haven't changed the activity quickly enough. Maybe you need to reflect and go, why is this person distracted? Is it because I've been talking at them for the last 20 minutes and they haven't had an activity or something to do? So part of it is also self-reflection and recognizing maybe I need to change things up a bit to engage them again. So I think that's a brilliant point, Esther.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I can't see that though in my chat, and I'm wondering if she just sent it to you sneakily.
She's definitely sent it to everyone. It says many, many
Everyone.
cannot concentrate or keep the modules short and vary the dynamic. I may have had the
Yes,
bit
I
about being
can.
boring.
Yes, yeah. I would no, I was just looking for the word boring. That's what I wanted. That's what I was honing in on. Can I find the
It
word
was just me,
boring?
I'm afraid.
But no, and Esther, you're right. You know, you saying you train a lot of neurodiverse people, and they often look distracted. I cannot tell you how hard it is, really honestly, and I'm talking constantly on this, for me to be sat here like this. I really struggle. I have got my phone in my hand, but I've got my phone in my hand because I've got the questions on there. But equally, I've got things that I'm fiddling with continually, because even just this level, if you really want me to concentrate, I need to be doing more than one thing at a time. So yeah, that no judgment thing, but also calling them out on it. Do you know, people are responsible for their own learning. So I think that's really important. Not doing it in the group, trying to take them separate. However, there are some times where it is absolutely appropriate within the group. If you have been personally messaging and such like, and people are not engaging in that way, there are times when, of course, it is absolutely right to then address a question and such like to people. What about yourself, Noel? Have you got anything to add around? I know we've covered it quite comprehensively, but just any top tips that you
Probably
do if
just
you see people distracted?
Yeah, probably just to add on to what you said, that check-in, just how really important that is, because what I find, depending on kind of what training it is, you find there's experts within that room that probably have a lot more expertise within yourself, like they've been in the role for 20, 30 years. And so when you find kind of they're probably thinking that they're not going to gain much learning from the training within itself. But I think when you can draw upon their experiences, that's when they really start to come alive, because they have the knowledge, have the experience, and they're quite good at talking about it. So not that it becomes a share facilitation, but you can really kind of utilize that and give yourself a rest as well from talking. But what I also like to do at the beginning of every session as well, I like to ask just how people are feeling mentally and physically from 0 to 10. It just gives me a really good way to gauge the room, because if people are telling me mentally they're feeling a 2 or a 3, then I know that something is not quite right. And then I can start to kind of just tailor my approach around them if I feel that they are becoming distracted.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I think it's so important. I know within all of our training sessions, we have a well-being strand all the way through it. It's part of the uniqueness of the methodology. But within your training, it's even more important, isn't it? Because your training is all focused on wellness, well-being, trauma-informed, or is emotive. And so actually that check-in at the beginning, because then you can make that judgment. And the bit about actually engaging them at their level really connects into a question that Chris has asked within the chat here as well, about actually how do you handle someone whose organisation has paid for their training who just doesn't engage, especially if it's not a pass or fail course. And I thought I'd start with you, Noel, because you started there by answering the distracted question by saying, actually, do you know, engage them at their level. But equally, that really works for this as well. Do you know, particularly if you've got somebody who already thinks they're an expert in that subject?
Yeah, I try to get them to recognize the value of training as well, because I reflect upon the last company that I worked with, and just when training opportunities come up, that I never took the opportunity to jump on as much training as I possibly could. But now that I freelance, it's kind of like if I need any additional training, then I've got to source that training myself. So it's just getting them to recognize that the value of training when they are with an organization, that they are being paid for it, and also the transferable skills that they can gain from that as well, that they're going to be able to pass on. And a lot of what you find when you connect to people's values as well, that they always talk about kind of how much they value their teams and working within teams. So I think the more that we can get people to kind of just utilize that peer support amongst themselves, so even if they feel that they're not getting value out of it at the beginning, by the end of it, they are, because they're bringing value to the delegates and their colleagues within the session itself.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely. Do you know, I can be quite honest in my approach, and I will say to people, do you know, you're never going to get this 6 hours of your life back ever.
Yeah.
Do you know, you're not going to get this 6 hours of your life back. So actually, it's about what can you do you know, what can you get from this? Now, it might not be that you're going to be learning anything new from the objectives, but actually you might, when was the last time you actually got 6 hours to be able to process, reflect on your own work, do you know, consider your own kind of next steps within the context of your role and this subject and such like. And so I'll say to them, do you know, it is a privilege to be able to spend this time out of the office, not having all of that pressure, and think about what you can contribute to the wider group as well. So I will do exactly what you say there, Noel, and just try and get them engaged. I think the other thing, Chris, is some people will come along and immediately have made their own decisions that the course is not going to be worthwhile to them. And it is a skilled facilitator and a confident facilitator that says to them, that's absolutely fine. You hold that opinion. And as we go through this course, you know, let's have an open conversation and dialogue about that. Because I want this to be useful for everybody. And that might be that it's useful for you from a networking perspective, or a sharing your information perspective, or a reflection perspective, or it might be the new objectives that I've brought. But I will quite directly, but with a smile on my face, actually challenge people about it if, you know, if they're open about that as well.
Yes, I've been
Do
on the
tell us.
receiving end.
Sorry, say that again, no.
I said, yes, I've been on the receiving end of your challenges.
Yeah. Well, do you know, I was that delegate when I had to go to a training course a couple of weeks ago. In the UK, if you get caught speeding, and this was the first time in like 15 years, I just have to say that if you get caught speeding, before you get the points on your license, you get the option to go to a training course about what's the impact of speeding and things. And I certainly turned up as that delegate with a sulky face, thinking I knew it all and didn't want to engage. So, do you know, and I actually felt at that point, I was like, oh gosh, do you know, actually, our facilitators, you guys are really skilled to be able to. And that facilitator was within 10 minutes, I was connected because she had given a statistic of how many people are killed each year in road traffic accidents. She'd related it to a town. She'd asked us all where we'd come from. And then she said to me, oh, well, that's the whole of Cambridgeshire is wiped out every year. And she said to somebody else, that's 3 times that city that you live in is wiped out every year. And so it just connected us immediately, even though we were switched off. So I think, yeah, that connection part is really key. Sarah, I'm just going to answer your question because your question's quite specific, and I feel like it'd be really mean to ask Becky or Noel off the top of their heads at this point, because I did also have a look on our resources whilst they were talking. So Sarah says, hello, love to know about how we make our handbooks screen reader compatible. Can you recommend any free screen readers we can test it on, or any other pointers? We have visually impaired delegates and feel like we would be serving them better. Yeah, so first of all, Sarah, thank you for even asking that and for even caring. You know, that is, yeah, that's exactly what we hope of any facilitators. What I would say is what I mentioned last week around PowerPoint and Word, both literally at the top in the search bar. If you just put accessible, it will come up with kind of a check that it does for you. And then you can click to accept all of the things that it's suggesting or not accept them. Then what I would say is once you've done that, if you're going to PDF the document, that's where you have to start being a little bit careful because PDF can sometimes reduce the accessibility that Word has put in. But there are some free screen readers that you absolutely can use and test. So there's one that is the Word one, and you just download it, and it's NVA. So N for November, V for Victor, A for Alpha. In fact, you know, it'd be easier to say NV, so N for November, V for Victor, and then access.org. And that one's really good for Windows, and you can download it for free. And then you can literally just plug in any of your documents and ask it to read your document, and it'll tell you the bits that it can't read. So that's a really good kind of final check. And there's also some others that you can download the apps for. And there's a different one for Mac and iOS. And that one's called CMD. So CMD, Charlie, Mike, Delta. I was testing my own alphabet there. So yeah. And that one's for Mac and iOS. But the Windows one, the NV Access, is the one that we predominantly use if we're going to check things. And you can just kind of run it through that. Okay, fantastic. So, Sarah, do tell us if there's any, or ask a further follow-up question if there's anything else you kind of want us to add to that as well. Colm says, I always try to make training relatable by saying to them that I will learn just as much from their participation as they will hopefully gain from me. Yeah, Colm, that's a really good win. And really, honestly, I do from every single training session. So it's a great one, again, building that rapport as well. Chris, thank you that I'm that I wasn't alone on that speeding course. And Charlotte, going back to the last question about the distractions, that she'll always try and catch people in a break if she thinks that they've been distracted. And I've actually asked somebody to leave at lunchtime because they're being distracting to others. So that's an interesting one as well. So let's come to yourself first, Becky, just on the back of that. If somebody's and that it really connects into a question that Esther's put in as well. And a question that we were sent in. So I think lots of people are a little bit concerned about this. Do you know, people who are monopolising? So Esther's asked about neurodiversity, neurodiverse people and how to stop the monopolisers monopolising. But also within the chat, Charlotte said she's asked somebody to leave because they've been distracting others. And then I've had two other questions that are saying, you know, if somebody just won't let you get a word in edgeways, then what?
Yeah, and I think, and let's be clear, it's not always neurodivergent people. I think it can be anyone that monopolizes those spaces, and it is very difficult. I do think my 20 years of working with teenagers definitely helps me in this space. But I think sometimes it is about looking at the structure of your course and thinking about how is it, if all of your course is about opening up the forum and having people answer questions, you're always going to get the same people putting their hands up and answering. So that's why it can be really good to, well, either face-to-face or online, think about doing some group work. You can then change the groups around, because if someone's going to monopolize, they're going to probably do it for the day, but then at least you're spreading that out across different people. I will sometimes say, I'm not going to open up the forum. I would love to hear from X, Y, and Z, but I might give them a heads up. So from this activity, I'd love to hear from Noel. So just giving you a heads up that in a couple of minutes, I'm going to ask to hear from you. And that also helps you with people that might be really quiet. It is difficult though. I do have a very good facilitator face that tells you that I'm about to interrupt you, and that sometimes works well, and I'll take a breath. But also sometimes I will just interrupt and say, I'm going to stop you there because there's lots of other people that we need to hear from. So if we can just hold that thought, happy to take that up with you at the end and discuss it in more detail. I think sometimes we have to be quite strong in our approach, because there's nothing worse, is there, than being in a training session when one person is the only person that talks all day. So I think it is that balance about thinking about how you're doing activities so that you're giving different people opportunities. So using the chat box is really good, because then people who may be a bit quieter can access. Using things like Slido, using the whiteboard when it works, is great, because then people can feed in. It doesn't matter about who's taking turns. But just being aware that if all of your discussions are based on people kind of just opening the floor and letting people put their hands up, you're going to get the same people every time. So it is about structuring how you hear from different people at different times. And you know, I've found a majority of the times people that do that are aware of it, and B, just don't like silence. They're the people that think someone has got to answer and now I'm going to be the first person to do it. So, you know, we can name that at the beginning. It's okay, let's have some thinking time. We don't have to answer straight away. I'm just going to give everyone else a chance to have a think. Or if they've got their hand up first, just say, oh, that's brilliant, Tammy. We've heard quite a bit from you today. I'm going to hear from someone else now. There are kind of politer ways for you to say, I'm not going to let you talk for a bit. That would be my input.
Yeah.
Just to add to
Becky.
that as well, what I tend to do if you got too much of a talkative person and no one's speaking, then when I put them into groups, then I will say kind of pick a nominated speaker within your group who hasn't said anything back yet. So then it makes it easier for them, doesn't it? Because they've already discussed it amongst themselves for a few minutes, and I find I always get engagement that way.
Yeah, that's a brilliant tip, Noel. I love that one where you just say, like I'll say it to the group as well. So even if it's not about going into small groups, I'll go, okay, so we're about to talk about authentic leadership. What I'd really love during this is to hear from some of the people we've not yet heard from today. Feel free, that can be verbally or it can be in the chat. I've got no issue either way. And we will go into breakout groups soon, and I'll be asking for a nominated person to feedback. So exactly like you are now, just kind of um, slightly putting a lid on the people who have been talking a bit and just giving the others an option to go, oh, they asked for somebody that haven't yet, do you know? And it's just a nice way of giving people the option to do that. But I do think when you do ask that, you do need to give the chat box option as well, because there is always somebody who's sat there thinking, please don't call on me, please don't call on me, please don't call on me. And what you don't want to do is like really raise that anxiety as well.
But what I've seen you do really well, Tammy, as well, which I've learned from you actually, is about kind of just pulling people out of that rabbit hole. Just once we kind of see them start going down it, and then another delegate goes down it, and then another one goes down it. You're quite effective of just kind of just bringing them back out and kind of moving on with the session. Not that you're dismissing it, you will come back to it at some point throughout the day. So thanks for that learning for me.
Do you know, one of my favourite terms is that's really interesting. If we can just park that so that, do you
Yeah.
know, that's really interesting, because really interesting doesn't mean relevant, useful, or anything like that. Do you know, just means interesting. And if you know your session well, one of the lovely things to do is say, oh, that's really interesting, Charlotte. Later on, we talk about that in depth. Do you mind if I come back to you then? If you do that, you have got Charlotte switched on for the rest of the session because she's waiting for you to come back to her. And it's a really nice way of kind of validating what somebody's saying, but also telling them to shut up because you've got to get through this session, you know. So yeah, that is really good. So thank you for that, Noel. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to come over and Noel, I know you've just spoken, but I keep starting with Becky, so I'm going to start with you if that's okay. And I know that you do this exceptionally well. So I just wondered if one of the questions that came in was about tailoring training. And somebody asked, how do you tailor training to meet different needs? You know, whether that's before the training, whether that's during the session. You've got a variety of needs. How are you tailoring the training to meet them?
Well, I'll probably just give an example. I've just got off a tailoring call before I actually come on here. So that's a training that I'm delivering in a month's time. So it's kind of just meeting up with the client and just having an understanding of exactly what it is that they're looking for. But as we do really well kind of within Tay, it's not just about kind of just the training, it's about how we connect it specifically to that organization. So it's having an understanding of the delegates. So for example, the delegates within this session would be frontline professionals and they work with service users within the criminal justice system. So it's having an understanding of not just the delegates, but the people that they work with. So how you're tailoring that session specifically for them and how you're tying in with their own values into the organization, kind of within itself. But then what you may find sometimes is when one of the questions I think it was tailoring on the spot, because we may come into a session and we may have to move things around on the spot, and you just got to think how can you move things around without losing the quality of the training, and there could be multiple different things that could result moving stuff around. For example, where I asked the question about how people are feeling mentally and physically, if the whole room's telling you mentally they're feeling a 2 or a 3, then you know that you need to kind of shift things up. And what I tend to do in that instance, I bring some movement and I just bring a kind of nice energizer to lift people up a little bit before I go into the main bit of the session itself.
Rookie error there. I muted myself. So I was just agreeing with you there, Noel. I was just agreeing with you. Thank you. Becky, anything you want to add to that at all?
I think you just have to be like, ready to tailor at any point. Tailoring isn't a one moment in time. You have that, like Noel said, you have your tailoring call in advance, but you never truly know until you've got the people. I think I mentioned it last week, someone who said, actually, I find it really difficult to read off of a white paper, and that's what handout was. So then helping them to get it onto a different color, you just don't know until people are in front of you, and trying to make those changes, but also knowing your limits. You can't tailor for everybody in the space, and I think that's really important as well, because otherwise you'll just go round and round in circles and not actually end up delivering anything. So it's getting the balance of tailoring things to meet need, but not doing so that no one learns anything because you've done 75 different things in that space.
But also as well, listening just after the session itself, is listening to the feedback, and just to see kind of just how the learning needs were met within that session, to see whether there's any further adjustments that need to be done after the session itself.
Yeah, do you know, it's a big lesson, I think, as a facilitator. And don't get me wrong, like I still feel it emotionally. Do you know, I can have a session, say I've got 16 people in a session, and you can have 15 people say, that was the best session of my life, it's changed the world, etc. And you can have one person going, yeah, not sure I enjoyed that. And you're like, and you really, you take it personally. And I've had to work really hard and work with the TAFE facilitators really hard to actually go, no, you're not going to please everybody all of the time. You don't know how somebody's come into that session. You don't know what they're dealing with. You don't know where their head's at. You don't know what's influenced that topic before, that situation, etc. What you can do is two things. One, you can hand on heart, be the best you can be in that moment. Now, again, we don't know what's happened to you yesterday, today. We don't know what tech issues you're having, what personal things. We don't know whether it's a new subject to you and you're not confident or whatever. So as long as in that moment, all of our TAFE facilitators have done their prep and they are as the best they can possibly be in that moment, that's considering all of this equity and inclusivity and engagement and tailoring and all of that. But in that moment, they're being the best they can be. That's all they can be. Do you know? And I think sometimes we then have to be really willing to accept the feedback and just have a mindset of continuous improvement. And just because we didn't do it yesterday doesn't mean that we can't improve and do it tomorrow. And when we are always doing our best, actually, when we are always getting 100% excellent, do you know, actually quite often we will get quite fatigued as facilitators. I know, particularly with safeguarding training, I can really consciously remember when I was done, when I was just like not delivering that regularly anymore. Do you know, I was delivering it like 3 times a week. There come a point where I was like, actually, I'm not the best at delivering this anymore because I'm just rolling it out a bit, you know. And now when I deliver it, I'm really excited to deliver it. But I had to recognize that myself. So I think that continuous improvement and that feedback is really important from a tailoring perspective for ongoing training delivery, whether it's the same customer or whether it's a different customer as well. And then just to remind people what we'd said previously about sometimes you can't have conversations and tailoring calls with customers because they might be open courses or mixed people, etc. And that's when you can use your polls and you can use your activities to just get a gauge of actually what type of people are in the room. Are they new to your subject? Do you know, are they local? Do you know, what are the dynamics that you need to consider when you're delivering that training as well? So polls are really great for that. Brilliant. I'm just going to ask Julie. Julie, you put a question in the Q&A box. Thank you. But I'm just wondering whether you are happy to unmute and talk us through that, because I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking. So you're welcome in the chat to say, no, I don't want to talk. Or, yeah, look, hand up. Julie's happy to talk. Ezra, would you mind unmuting her for us?
Sure thing. There you go, Julie.
Thanks so much, Julie.
Hi, yeah, I was just thinking that, for example, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of sexual harassment training, obviously in line with the law change back in October. And I was just saying that So that's all been delivered face to face. And we've got a colleague that is neurodivergent ADHD who hasn't really spoken about that. So you've got a bit of confidentiality going on. So I know it because of my role. But so we kind of give him the space to sort of get up, move around a little bit, and exactly some of the things that you've talked about today. But what then sort of came up in the tea break was that people were saying, you know, why is he doing that? Can't he sit down? And it's just, so it's sort of balancing the needs that you can't, you know, you obviously don't want to break the person's confidentiality and obviously make him feel uncomfortable. But I found it quite difficult. It's the first sort of time I was a bit like, oh, actually, this is a really good point, because it was quite distracting for me as well, because you kind of kept losing your point. And he was exactly as we've talked about, the person who wanted to talk. You know, when I sort of did the group exercise and sort of gave a question, his answers took us to a completely different, darker space than perhaps others had before. So I just wondered really if anyone's got any sort of techniques for how you kind of manage it in a face-to-face environment rather than the virtual.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Julie. That's really helpful. In fact, I'm not going to answer. I was about to answer. I can't help myself, but I'm going to do that not monopolising thing and say, Becky or Noel, would either of you like to answer that before I give my 2 pennies?
Well, probably movement within a session is something that I always encourage, just because, especially if it's a full day's training, then I kind of just put it out to every delegate. When we open up the session, we talk about the kind of learning agreement, the kind of safe spaces and health check. But I suppose within that instance, then it's probably about thinking just in terms of our movement, it's just been a reminder that it can be distracting to other people as well. So it's just a kind of about where we're moving, how we're moving, and just so we're not within each other's space. But also as well as just being mindful of what we are saying, creating that safe space, because we don't know any of the other delegates within the room. We don't know them personally, so we don't know what they've been through kind of within their life. So it's just about thinking when we are talking emotive subjects, just thinking of other people around us.
Yeah, thank you, Noel. And my answer was going to be really similar. It was going to be about actually whether it's face to face or live online. Excuse me, right at the beginning when you're doing when you're setting the scene and you're doing kind of those like we always do a learning agreement, for instance. And I would say that the point about, you know, and we talk about this extensively in our learning agreement. Yeah, yes, we did send one of those through, that an example, one of those as well. But when we're talking about the learning agreement, sorry, we say we're going to be doing our best to consider everybody's differences here, and you're all going to have completely different needs. Some of you might want to get up and walk about, some of you might want to colour, some of you might be doodlers, some of you might be reflectors, etc. I'm going to do my utmost to meet all of your needs. However, we want everybody to be able to learn as effectively as possible. So whatever you need for your need to be met, please be really considerate of other people. So, and I will always say, for instance, I will walk around for the entirety of this session. Do you know, if I'm distracting you, just give me a little bit of a nod and I'll head to the other side of the room. Or, do you know, so I'll just give examples. So rather than identifying that this one person might need it, we will prepare the session and situation in a way that everybody can have their needs met, and say to them, sometimes those needs will conflict with each other. So just like the adults we really need to be considerate of each other. And with that person that you're talking about, I would have at one of the first activities, I'd have probably taken them aside and said to them, do you know, are you okay? Because your answers are making me a little bit concerned because they're taking us in this direction. Or I would say, fantastic that you feel comfortable enough to be up and about during the session. Can I just ask you, could you just keep your walk into behind the last set of chairs so that you're not walking in front of people or beside people and you're not distracting their viewpoint? So I would have probably gone and kind of directly spoken to him. But in general, the way that I set the session would be, actually, we're adults. We need to be considerate of each other, irrelevant of what our needs are. Julie, does that answer your question? Do you want to add to that at all? Awesome, fantastic. Becky, I'm going to come back over to you if that's okay. And I'm going to ask you, we had a bit of a chat about this at the end of the session last week, just me, you, and Noel actually, and we were talking about kind of language barriers, and we were talking about inclusivity, and we were talking about pronouns, and we were talking about actually pronouncing people's names. And me and you had a bit of a conversation about actually, do you know, when you have some of those language barriers, do you know, actually, how do you overcome that within the session?
I think that, yeah, it's really interesting. I think for me, it is about taking your time, and particularly, so a really basic one is around getting people's names right. So again, I go back to that, when you get people one at a time, it gives you the opportunity to check how you pronounce someone's name. So I did training this morning, and there were a couple of people whose names it wasn't obvious how you pronounce them. So rather than just mangling it, I asked them, how do you pronounce it? And then I wrote it out phonetically on a piece of paper in front of you. And things like that can be really key. But in terms of if language might be a barrier for them, I think, you know, when I was a special educational needs coordinator, we talked about creating an inclusive classroom. And what that meant was doing things that supported people with additional needs, but actually helped everyone. And so in this instance, I would say things like slow delivery, and that doesn't mean slow pace. That means being aware. I am a terrible fast talker, so being aware of slowing things down so that if someone is trying to instantaneously translate, which is what a lot of people might be doing, they've got more of a chance. Really using plain English. You know, we can get so carried away with using flouncy language when actually we don't need to. So being really clear on the language that we're using that is accessible, and thinking about our slides as well. The slides should support and inform what we're saying, shouldn't be massive chunks of writing that someone's got to try and read and understand. So I think it is about considering how it might be a challenge for someone, not making assumptions. Again, just because someone doesn't sound English or whatever, we're not going to assume that they don't understand. But that one-to-one at the beginning can be about, you know, is there anything I can do to support in general? And they might mention that English is their second language and therefore they need extra support in some ways. But just taking our time, slow the delivery for everyone, so not rushing through, plain language, simple slides should really be the key for supporting someone. But if someone's language level is such that they find it impossible, then probably the course isn't the best place for them. That might be, you know, in itself, they might need to think about a different way to access that learning and that information, because it's going to be really stressful. I can't imagine going into a course on safeguarding in Polish or German or another language. It just wouldn't happen. So thinking about what is the best place for them to be as well with them. So I think that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, no, thank you, Becky. I think really helpful. And I know sometimes, again, depending on the size of your group, it's not possible to let everybody in individually. And I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but that is when your pre-course information is just really important for people. And then when people kind of arrive, you can say to people, do you know, please make sure that the name that is displayed on your screen, if you're live online, is the name that you'd like to be called by today if I'm interacting with you. And then if you can then, as the facilitator, kind of take a look and determine, are there any names actually you need help pronouncing? And then what I've done with larger sessions where we've not been able to let people in previously is I've just messaged them directly, or when there's an activity, I've kept them in the main room just with me and said, oh, do you mind if I just ask you? And nobody ever minds if you just ask. That people would much prefer if you just ask. And I am verbally, if somebody tells me how to pronounce their name, by the time they have finished telling me, I have already forgotten how to pronounce it. Do you know, it just does not register in my mind at all. So I have to do what Becky does and literally write it down phonetically. If I don't do that, then within seconds I've forgotten it. And I can tell you it is awkward the second time round. You know, the first time nobody minds whatsoever, but the second time round it is really awkward. So so writing it down phonetically I think is really key. And I think as well, when do you know, one of the questions that have been sent in is about, do you know, how do you assess engagement throughout the training session? And we've only got a few minutes left, and so I'm not gonna kind of go into this one, but I do want to remind people that when we talked on the camera off, camera on session, one of the resources that was shared there was an engagement checklist, and it had multiple pages of different activities that you can do to get people to engage. But then at the bottom was kind of the table that is a bit of a tally with regards to actually whether people have engaged and asked questions and things like that. Now, when I do that engagement checklist and I put somebody's name down, I always put their name phonetically in that engagement checklist. That then connects things together. That then connects their name and their engagement together for you, which for me just kind of really helps solidify it in my mind. Yeah, so I can see Noel is typing an answer there, but it said, Sky, you've mentioned a learning agreement a couple of times, but I don't remember if this was covered previously. What does it look like? Is it a written agreement, etc.? No, so a learning agreement for us is literally just a slide. And the slide tends to have it's right at the beginning. So we'll say hello. And then we will say your objectives for today. And that's so people are immediately switched on and they're like, oh, okay, I know what's going to happen here. I know what to expect for the day. Then we'll go into the introductions, and we'll get people to introduce themselves, and that's to liven them up, build a bit of rapport, etc. And then we'll go into the learning agreement slide, and the learning agreement slide usually has 3 or 4 different kind of words on it. First one is learning agreement, then there's accelerated learning, then there's safe space, and then there's learning online. And for the learning agreement, we'll literally say something like, this session belongs to you guys. Do you know, this is 6 hours of your life. You're never going to get back. We want to make it as valuable as possible for you. For us to make it as valuable as possible, this needs to be a partnership approach between all of us. It needs to be a collaboration. So to do that, let's start off by deciding what we're going to agree, what rules we're going to set for ourselves within this training session. I'm going to kick you off and say the first rule that I'm going to set as engagement, because you will get sick of the sound of my voice if it's just me talking at you, and that's no fun for anybody. What else do we expect within this session? And you'll just encourage other people to be saying things like confidentiality, respecting other people's voices, respecting differences, etc. And you can just lead people in the direction you want. And that really kind of connects back to what we said previously in the answers around setting that space and saying to people, we're going to try and meet all of your needs, and some of you that might be walking about, etc. But consideration was a word that we used within our learning agreement. Do you know? So it's about setting those expectations, really. Fantastic. We've got about 3 minutes left. I'm just going to ask at this point if there's anything Becky or Noel wants to add, and then I'm going to ask anybody if they've got any other kind of burning questions before we start pulling things together.
I was typing the answer in the chat there, Tammy, but you explained it a lot better than what I was typing, so I just left it.
Did you just stop?
Yeah. Well, I thought I'm not typing it as well as you're explaining it, so.
No, and what I would say, really honestly, is if you're in our community, just literally post in there and say, can I have an example of a learning agreement, or can somebody tell me what they do? I think there's even in fact, I know there's even a YouTube, on our YouTube account, there's a recording of me doing a face-to-face learning agreement and talking people through safe spaces, learning agreement, accelerated learning. There's like about a 10-minute video that we use as a resource as well, that's on YouTube, that is me doing that live for people. So yeah, it's that really interactive with the people in the room, and it's about the thing that Becky and Noel and myself have kind of lent on quite a few times, the importance of the rapport that you're building. That's your place to build the rapport. That's your place to be talking to people about. If you're having your cameras off, that's absolutely fine. But just know I'm assessing your engagement as we go through, and you're going to have to pop into the chat box every single answer to every single question I ask. Do you know, that's where you're having that laugh and joke. That's where you're doing that safe space. That's where you're building that rapport. Becky, any final words?
No, I think we've covered loads this evening. Thanks to everyone for their brilliant questions.
Yeah, fantastic. I think we've got through all of the questions that were sent through and about half that were sent in advance. So I think we've done pretty well there. If you have any more questions, any more queries about delivering training or about Arlo, yeah, please do get in touch. You should receive all of your resources again after. So everything you've already had that kind of contributes to this session, you'll receive afterwards. And if anything, if you've got any follow-up or anything, just drop us a message and get in touch. Thanks
Thanks,
very
Tammy.
much, everybody.
Thanks, Tammy. Thanks, everyone.